NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is urging Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to develop a funding plan to save Greyhound. Singh wrote Trudeau a letter today, adding his voice to Western provinces and Indigenous communities who are sounding an alarm about how Greyhound's cuts will affect people who rely on the bus company. Should Greyhound get some kind of subsidy to stay viable? Does the government have a role to play, or should the feds stay out of it? Joining me now from Winnipeg is Dan Vandal, Liberal MP for St. Boniface, St. Vital. In Edmonton, Conservative economic development critic Matt Genereux. And with us from Vancouver is the NDP's health critic, Don Davies. Hi to everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh, great to be with you.
Mr. Vandal, I'm going to start with you. Yesterday, we spoke with the Vice President of Greyhound's Western Canada Division, and he says the company has been in constant communication with the federal government for years to drive home the point that no private sector company can operate this service in those rural areas without some kind of assistance. Why did your government refuse the request for help?
Well, first of all, I want to say we certainly empathize with all Canadians who are going to be negatively impacted by the unfortunate decision by Greyhound to cut services. We especially recognize that this could affect Indigenous communities harder than the other communities. There's many Indigenous citizens that use this line for health reasons. Others use it for employment and other services, other reasons to get to cities. So at this point, we're going to just communicate with Indigenous communities, First Nation and Métis, communicate with municipalities, with provinces, to try to arrive at options to move forward together and see where those options lead us.
Is one of those options the federal government subsidizing the company to keep those routes open?
I think what's important today is that we did get an inkling of hope from a bus company in Thunder Bay that indicated that they were willing to look at this situation to try to provide a service that's desperately needed. I think we need to all communicate better and work towards solutions. Perhaps there's an opportunity to involve one of the Indigenous economic development agencies as being part of the solution. But our government is committed to working with everyone to find a solution.
Mr. Genereux, do you think that other private companies will, as in that single example in Thunder Bay, will step up enough to fill the void that's just being created in Western Canada?
Yeah, Vashi, before I just want to echo Dan's comments. On behalf of the Conservative Party of Canada, of course, our hearts and thoughts go out to the many people who will be affected by this decision to change and to cancel the bus routes within rural and Indigenous communities across Canada. With Dan's comments are hardly inspiring that there's going to be something done here. We see this time and time again. We see a government that will say one thing, do another. When it comes to certain things like standing up for rural Canadians, this is certainly something that we're not seeing previously, and we're not seeing at this point in time either.
Do you think the federal government, Mr. Genereux, should subsidize the company to keep those routes going?
I think what the federal government should do is look at a number of their policies and a number of their things that they've done over the past few years. First thing that comes to mind is putting on a carbon tax. So that's a major disincentive to any company getting involved in the transportation industry.
You think that Greyhound is not working anymore because there's a carbon tax?
Sorry, I think I lost you.
Sorry, are you trying to say that Greyhound cut these services because there's a carbon tax?
No, I can barely hear you, Vashi, but I think I heard your question very faintly. When looking at a number of the policies that the Liberal government have put in place, like things like the carbon tax, it's an incredible disincentive to continue the organization going in a way that they've done in the past, and that's something that would disincentivize any company for getting involved in this. And seeing that what the decision that Greyhound has made on this is especially concerning, because it does affect those rural communities more than most.
Okay, before I move on to Mr. Davies, I do have to point out that we extensively interviewed an executive from Greyhound, and he never singled out a carbon tax as a reason why they were no longer running the service. But in any event, Mr. Davies, your party's leader wrote to Mr. Trudeau today to do something about this. Do you want to see straight up subsidization?
Can't hear.
Is there any
No.
Well, absolutely. There's no question that this is something that falls squarely within federal jurisdiction as a matter of interprovincial transportation. And as has been pointed out, it needs to be underscored that, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of Canadians from British Columbia to Northern Ontario rely on bus services as their sole means of transportation to access jobs and employment, healthcare and other essential public services, and to connect with their families. And here in British Columbia, we have the documented fact that the lack of bus services along the Highway of Tears led to missing and murdered Indigenous women who had to rely on hitchhiking because there weren't any adequate bus services. So this is a critical service, and I think that the federal government needs to play a leadership role in providing some form of funding formula to help ensure that this vital public service stays available for Canadians.
What kind of, so you want direct, do you want direct funding to Greyhound? Is there, is there any kind of quantification of that from your party's perspective?
Well, I think there's any number of options that are available. I don't think the form of financial assistance is as important as the commitment itself. It can take many forms, but what is critical is that we recognize that this is a foundational service for Canadians. And I don't think that it's acceptable for the Prime Minister to deflect this to the provinces and essentially abdicate federal responsibility, not only to the 400 workers who risk losing their jobs in October, but to all of those Canadians who stand to lose access to this vital service. And I'm looking for leadership. We just saw the federal government purchase a pipeline for $4.5 billion because they said it was in the national interest and in their jurisdiction. Well, I think these kind of transportation services are in the national interest and certainly are within federal jurisdiction. So I think a strong case can be made for federal leadership, including financial assistance.
Mr. Vandel, I take your point that your government is sort of looking at all options right now, but what I don't get is that how this is just something that's happening now. The company said that they've been talking about this since 2004, that they have been extensively in constant communication with the government, talking about this eventuality for the last 3 years. We saw lobbying records as just as recent as March and February. There was somebody lobbying Transport Canada delivering this message. So why is a solution just being looked at now?
Actually, at no point in the conversations did Greyhound ever signal to government that they were going to cut services. I think this
Even though they have already been cutting services for a number of years on those routes?
I think it's important. First of all, we all understand the importance of the Greyhound services. It's important to actually talk to the communities, the Indigenous communities, First Nation and Métis, the towns, the villages, the municipalities, to try to find a solution. And there's been a company, and as I said earlier, a company in Thunder Bay that
that's just one example, with all
that
respect.
they may come forward. Let's not forget this entire cutback, this entire incident was announced Monday afternoon. We are now Wednesday afternoon.
But what they're saying is that they have continually delivered. Are you saying you never once thought that this would happen?
I'm saying that at no point in the conversations did Greyhound ever signal that they were going to cut services, completely cut services, and that's an important fact. The actual cutbacks were announced Monday afternoon. We're now Wednesday afternoon. It's important that we keep communicating with those communities, those towns, those reserves, those Métis communities, to try to find a reasonable option going forward. Our government is committed to that, and we have an open door policy to work together to look at options going forward.
Mr. Genereux, I hope the audio issue is better for you now. Sorry, I apologize for that. You had been saying that the government needs to look at its other policies, but you didn't really answer the question about whether or not they should be entertaining the option of subsidizing Greyhound to get these services back up and running.
I blame everybody in the studio for cheering so loudly for England. I think this is probably why. It's not perfect, but let's make do. It's at the end of the day, this is a government that seems to have put in policies, and then once a company like let's use Trans Mountain, Kinder Morgan, has failed to move forward as a private company, suddenly they jump in and buy the organization. So we're certainly not supportive of moving down that path forward. But again, it's about policies being in place, like things like the carbon tax. We just saw an announcement from Minister Baines this week on a huge hit to internet in rural Canada as well, with his 5G announcement. So there's a number of these policies really seem to not take into account the impact that does have in rural Canada.
Okay, quickly, I have just 20 seconds left, but Mr. Davies, can you respond to that?
Well, a few things. It's not just a rural issue. I'm here in Vancouver, and many people who live in urban centres rely on Greyhound to connect them with their families and jobs across Western Canada. And so,
I hate to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. We do have to go. We have a hard time for our commercial, but I really appreciate your time, all three of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vashi.